And I would just implore you to wait a few minutes, and we'll definitely be fielding questions during Elyssa's talk. But really excited you all are excited about it. All right, we're gonna get started. First, just wanna thank you all. Welcome to tonight's virtual talk. We're very excited to be sharing some beaver knowledge and some of our expertise of Elyssa. I want to introduce myself. My name is Sara Rocero. I work for Snohomish Conservation District, and I am a community engagement coordinator. A lot comes with this job, but one of the most fulfilling things is really connecting with folks. And so what this looked like before COVID-19 was something like this. We're all gathering together, learning with one another, sharing stories and information. Currently, our state is working like this. And so we're more social distancing. You know, a lot of us are working from home if we're, you know, very privileged to be able to do that. And, you know, we want to still connect with folks. And I think that's just the purpose of holding webinars and really switching to a virtual angle. So we're just really excited that you all can join us. So, living with beavers. Tonight, you're going to learn some beaver facts and how to really manage beavers that might be on your property or near your property, and what are some things you can do to really keep beavers there, but also not allow it to damage any infrastructure or property. So tonight, all of the attendees' audio lines are muted. Only our panelists will be able to share video and speak. We just want to have things a little private, and as folks are unmuted, you know, sometimes it can get a little noisy. So we just want to have clean lines for everyone to really hear the material they've been tuning in for tonight. One of the ways you can really ask some questions, since we can't do it really face-to-face or in person, there's going to be a little Q&A tab down here on your bottom of the Zoom, and you can type your questions into there, and then we will answer them throughout the talk when Elyssa has some good pauses, and I will ask those questions from you all, and then she can answer them. If you're having any technical difficulties, please feel free to use the chat function down here, and we will try our best to assist you and work through those technical issues. Unfortunately, if we're having bandwidth issues, it's not really something we're going to be able to help with. And I apologize for that. So a little about Snohomish Conservation District. In Washington State, there's 45 conservation districts. And if you live in Snohomish County or Camino Islands, we serve you. And so we work with private landowners, farmers, rural, urban folks, whether you're renting or owning. We're here to serve you and really help you with a lot of your needs that relate to conservation and resource management. So we work folks on a voluntary, non-regulatory basis, and we're staffed by locals who can really understand your needs of the community, and we have different experts in their field who can really tailor their advice to maybe some of the goals you have for your property. We have diverse funding. So we're funded by local, state, and federal funds. We work a lot of grants, and that's what's funding us tonight. Some of the services that we offer to folks in Snohomish County and Camino Islands are technical assistance. So we do site visits, help you with those conservation practices that you'd like to implement or some issues that you're having with your property. If we can't help you, we always try to find the next best service that can serve you. So we're just not going to just drop you and say sorry. We're going to really just work with you and make sure that you find the help that you need, even if we're not able to provide it. We have cost sharing that we're able to do with folks to get projects on their property. And, you know, these things vary depending on where you live, but we're really trying our best to cover a lot of Snohomish County and to offer folks with these cost share services. So those can be like engineering site plans. We also do lots of outreach, as you see here, but we also do youth education and adult education by doing these kind of workshops. We have electronic and print media. And then you can always contact us at outreach@snohomishcd.org for any questions, and you know, whatever goals you have with your property, we can try to help you. Some of the upcoming workshops we'll be hosting in June. They'll be June 23rd and 25th, and these are septic care workshops. So we're gonna teach folks some of the ways they can really avoid costly mistakes with their septic tanks. So tonight we have Elyssa Kerr. She is a habitat project coordinator with Snohomish Conservation District, and she manages our Living with Beavers program. She has great expertise, lots of training, knowledge, and experience working and mitigating issues caused by beavers, in which you'll hear a lot about more, but we're very thankful to have Elyssa with us, and it's really great to share our time with her. So before things get started, we just want to say thank you for joining us. We're really excited to offer these type of services. You know, if folks have internet, it can make things more accessible if you're not able to drive up on a weekday, if you were working when things were normal. So we just really appreciate you tuning in and hope you learn a lot more about beavers. So please ask questions, and I will ask those of Elyssa when they're time. And I'm going to pass things over to Elyssa, so please just give me a minute. I'm going to stop sharing and let her take over. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll just get my screen up here. Perfect. Okay, this is going to be great. All right. I'm so excited to have you all here to talk about living with beavers. So we've got a kind of action-packed evening here. Beavers are a hot topic, so I think you'll love this. My name's Elyssa. As Sarah mentioned, I'm a Habitat Project Coordinator at the Conservation District. And really, this is what my work used to look like, where I was out in the field doing a lot of work in water. I love nothing more than putting on chest waders and climbing into a beaver pond. This was back in November, so it's pretty cold, but definitely worth it. But now I'm a little bit more like this. I just took 20 minutes before my talk started. My cat is here. He's currently sleeping in the corner, so I think everything will be okay. But if you hear some meows, he's pretty vocal. So I apologize in advance. Things are a little different now, but I still get to talk about beavers, and as we're moving through the phases, I can still come out and provide assistance and definitely consultation over the phone or email regarding beaver issues. So tonight, our agenda is going to cover a couple different things. We're going to talk about beavers, of course, our old friends. We're going to talk about who they are. We're going to talk about what they're doing. So, you know, you may have seen some impacts of beavers, but really why and how and what are they doing? It's all a little bit of a mystery. We're going to talk a little bit about why you should care. There are certainly some benefits to beavers. I know I get a lot of eye rolls and questioning looks when I tell people that I work with beavers as a conservationist, but not really trying to save every single beaver in the world. I'm more about kind of all the other benefits. So we'll cover some of that. And then we're going to talk about how the Snohomish Conservation District fits in and why the Conservation District has a program and what we can offer you. So we're going to start off with a little poll. Sarah has a poll ready to go. Sarah, you got that up? I'd like you all to respond to this poll and give us a little bit more information about why you're tuning in tonight, and you know, have you ever seen a beaver? What's your experience there?
I'm going to give it 10 more seconds until I end the poll, and thank you all for your participation. All right, Elyssa, I'm going to share results.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Awesome. Okay, so lots of folks have seen beavers out while recreating, but not everybody, so that's pretty neat. And we're pretty much here to learn about beavers and what they're up to. Love that some folks tune into everything that SCD does, so appreciate that greatly. Okay, so we'll focus a little bit more on what beavers are up to and kind of generally learn about them, because I think that seems like a big interest. Okay, so here we go. Beavers, of course, our little friend that we're talking about. If you've ever seen a beaver, you might have a sense of their size, but I think a lot of folks, even if you have seen one, you might have just seen a little head in the water, but maybe not the whole animal out of the water. And the first thing that I like to impress upon folks when I talk about beavers is that beavers are huge. So beavers are about 25 to 70 pounds on average. It varies a lot. Of course, you might get a small 25-pound beaver, but those big honkers at 70 pounds are big. The biggest beaver I've ever heard about was 125 pounds, found somewhere in Canada. Not a totally confirmed sighting, but I definitely believe it, that there was a 125-pound beaver. So I want you to get that image in your head of, you know, these are not little water rats. These are big animals with a really big impact. The beavers that we're talking about here are the North American beavers, and they live pretty much all throughout North America. So this map here shows all this dark green is kind of that range of where beavers are. Beavers, of course, don't exactly follow political boundaries. They do go down into Mexico, but, you know, imperfect map. And beavers are living pretty much anywhere where there is water and woody vegetation. So you'll notice again that beavers aren't up here in the tundra, where there's not a lot of available water. Most of it is frozen for much of the year. And there's not a lot of woody vegetation either, because it's not hospitable for woody vegetation. Similar down in desert areas, we're not seeing a lot of beavers because no water, no woody vegetation. So those are kind of the two criteria. If you've got water and woody vegetation, you can have a beaver in your area. And, you know, there are a lot of doppelgangers in our area here in Washington and in Snohomish County. Animals that if you're out and about recreating or on your property, you might see and confuse with a beaver. So I want to walk through some of those. The first is the nutria. And these are kind of the most commonly confused with beavers, the most doppelganger of doppelgangers. And there's a few distinct differences, one being size. Nutria are only 8 to 20 pounds, so they're a little bit smaller than beavers, but a big nutria might look like a small beaver. The other thing to note is that they have a skinny rat-like tail here, unlike our beaver with the big flat tail. And their face is another thing that I like to point out. So take a look at our cute little beaver nose versus our kind of funky pig-like nutria nose, and their long white whiskers versus the beaver's more inconspicuous dark whiskers. So nutria are kind of a funky animal. They're not native to our area. They're actually native to South America, and were introduced to the US for fur. So folks brought nutria here to breed them and get more fur. Conversely, beavers were also brought down to South America where they were utilized for fur. Nutria have since escaped and are kind of all over and a little bit invasive. They tend to be more diggers than beavers, so they're digging into stream banks and causing more erosion, and often confused with beavers. Meanwhile, beavers down in South America are also wreaking havoc. A lot of the benefits that beavers have here just aren't the same down in South America. They aren't, you know, the plants there aren't adapted for beavers. It's just a whole different situation. So a little bit of a switch that we probably didn't need to make. But those are kind of the things to look for. If you see that little brown head swimming in the water, look out for those whiskers if you get close enough. Look out for the tail when they dive to see if it's that nice big flat beaver tail. Okay, other doppelgangers is a muskrat. Muskrat are those little water rats that I mentioned. So they are tiny. They look a lot like a little cute baby beaver, but again, they have that rat-like tail, similar to the nutria, rat-like tail, versus the beaver's big flat tail. And they're very, very small. So I have definitely seen a muskrat in a beaver pond and been like, oh my gosh, it's a baby beaver, it's perfect. But it was just a muskrat. So be aware of that, watch for that tail. Once again, as they dive, you can see that tail, which is fine. And then river otters. River otters often occupy very similar habitat to beavers. So you might see them in the same area. Once again, another just little brown head that you might see floating in the water. But otters are a little bit longer and skinnier. They look more like a wiener dog to the beaver's, I don't know, big chunky dog. And they've got kind of a wide, but not as wide as a beaver. Their tail is a little bit wide, more club-like than rat-like. Otters are in a totally different family. So all these other guys over here, the beavers, muskrats, nutria, they're all rodents. Otters are not, they're mustelids. Pretty funky. And then the weirdest one that we have in our area is the mountain beaver. These weird little guys are also rodents. Very much not similar to a beaver at all, named poorly. And they're kind of a weird primitive rodent. So they have that weird little face, and they spend a lot of time kind of in similar areas to beavers, but not so much, they're not really water animals. So all these other critters love to spend time in water and swim around. The mountain beavers are a little bit weirder, obviously. So what can I say? All right, so we're moving on to beaver eating habits. So we'll focus now entirely on beavers, forget all those other guys I just told you about. So beavers are herbivores. They're primarily eating herbaceous vegetation like this guy here, snacking on some spatterdock. And then they're also eating woody vegetation. So that herbaceous vegetation is primarily available in the summer when everything's in, bursting up out of the ground. So they might eat some of those aquatic vegetation. They might come up onto shore and eat some grasses and sedges. Sometimes they've even been known to dig and eat tubers of different species. But they're also eating woody vegetation. When they eat woody vegetation, they don't eat just the entire tree or the entire stick. Really what they're eating is the bark and the cambium, which is the layer just underneath the bark. So you'll notice this photo here. Really the beavers chewed down this tree and then munched all the bark off, and that was a nice tasty snack. Beavers will eat pretty much any plant out there, but they do have species that they tend to like more than others. So they do really like willows and cottonwoods. And the amazing thing about willows and cottonwoods is that even when they're chewed down by beavers, they will resprout. So this photo here is of a stick that was chewed by beavers at some point during the winter, and then when you come back in the spring, it's got 10 new shoots coming out of it. And you'll see kind of this shrubby willow cottonwood vegetation in a beaver area where they've just resprouted. So while they're chewing down the trees and it seems like a horrible loss, sometimes it can just cause kind of this different habitat, a little bit shrubbier and scruffier than a nice, tall, beautiful, straight cottonwood. So kind of funky. That being said, some of the species that they chew don't do this, or sometimes those species don't survive. So a chewed tree may become a dead tree, but I like to focus on the positive and that regrowth that can occur. At this point in my talk, normally I would hand around some sticks that have been chewed by beavers and hand around this awesome beaver skull that I have. But instead I just want to point out a couple of cool features. And next time you're out in a beaver wetland and have a chance to see some beaver chewed sticks, I highly recommend you check them out and give them a little touch, because the teeth marks are really evident on these beaver chewed sticks. They have this really distinct, sharp, pointy appearance because of the way the beavers chew them, and then you can see all those little teeth marks. So this one over here, this is a really old stick, something that was chewed by beavers years ago, and the stump is still just there. These ones are a little bit fresher, but you can see those nice chew marks and kind of that similar structure to all of these where they have that pointy, pointy left behind. And beaver teeth are really special. So you'll notice on this photo of the skull and this photo here of this smiley beaver that the front edge of their teeth is bright orange. The front edge of their teeth is reinforced with iron, so it's very, very strong and allows them to chew through wood. And their teeth are huge, as you can see by this skull, and continue to grow throughout their lifetime. So as they're chewing, they're wearing away their teeth, but they're continuing to grow. Additionally, that iron is only on the front edge of the teeth. So you'll notice in this profile view that the back edge of the teeth has worn away more quickly than the front and looks a little bit like a chisel. So they're essentially, as they chew, sharpening their teeth against trees and allowing them to chew even more, even better. So they continue to chew, continue to grow. Pretty impressive teeth that they've got. And then, of course, our beavers are so well known for the things that they do, the biggest of which is that they build these beautiful structures that are dams. And these, I've just got 3 different images here of dams because they all look a little bit different. And the way that beavers build dams kind of depends on where they're at, what the habitat's like, and what's available for them to build with. So you'll notice this photo on the bottom looks a little bit more like maybe your classic dam, built primarily out of sticks, maybe some big trees in there, everything thrown in. But this dam up here in the top left was built primarily out of mud. So beavers like to use sticks and trees and then pack it in with mud. But if there's not a lot of sticks and trees available, sometimes they'll just build these little tiny check mud dams. And then additionally, we see beavers building in areas that are primarily reed canary grass. There's not a lot of other vegetation for them to utilize for their dams. So they'll build something that's almost entirely out of grass and root wads from grass. So very impressive. I've also seen dams that are built with trash in them, sometimes a big tire. I work sometimes in urban areas where there's just all this different stuff that they've incorporated into their dams, and they're just resourceful and utilizing what they can find. So these dams that they build are really the core of what they do, and they're building them out of all these different materials and building them as big as they need to for the area they're in order to flood an area that they can live in. So beavers are very, very awkward on land. They're those big, maybe 60 or 70 pound animals with big webbed hind feet. So when they're on land, they're just kind of slow and awkward, but when they're in the water, they're smooth and sleek and fast. So the more water that they have, the better it is for them, the easier they can escape from predators, the better access they have to food around the wetted edges of their pond, and a safe place for them to build a home. So primarily, they're building these dams and creating ponds where then they can live. So contrary to some popular belief, beavers aren't really living in their dams. Instead, they're living in secondary structures that they build somewhere behind those dams in the flooded area. And those secondary structures are their lodges. These lodges are huge, right? We're talking about really big animals, so the lodges that they build are huge. You can see these folks here, 3 adult folks standing on a dam, or on a lodge, excuse me. And so these lodges are really big and can be really conspicuous. Sometimes they're in the middle of a pond, kind of your classic lodge that you're envisioning. But sometimes they're up against a shore or up against an island. They will utilize natural structures to build their lodge on. So these lodges kind of vary throughout. And the lodges are really special because they have an underwater entrance. So like I said, beavers are very awkward on land, but they're very sleek in the water. So it's easier for them to have this underwater entrance where predators can't enter. And then inside, they've got this nice dry chamber to hang out in. Not all beavers build lodges. So if you happen to go to an area and see those chewed sticks, you see a dam, you see maybe some beaver tracks, maybe you even see a little beaver swimming in the pond, but you can't locate this lodge structure. That doesn't mean they're not living there. Beavers can utilize bank dens. They'll dig dens themselves into the side of a riverbank or a pond shore, or they'll utilize bank dens that were built by other animals as well. So don't be alarmed if you don't find the lodge. Sometimes they're also pretty well hidden, so they might still be there. Okay, and then this is a great image of inside of a lodge. So these 2 beavers right here are cuddling inside that little dry chamber inside the lodge. There was this live stream of a beaver inside a beaver lodge. Somehow they had snuck a camera in there at the Mendenhall Glacier area. And it was active for a month or 2. And so it was amazing because beavers are nocturnal. So during the day when I'm up and about, I could tune in to this awesome live stream and see the little beavers in their cuddle puddle, which I loved. So inside the chamber, really cool. And beavers are living in family groups. So they do live with their whole family, known as a colony. Usually there's a mama and a papa beaver. They'll have 1 to 3 kits on average every year. And then those kits stay with them until they're 2 years old. So this is a little beaver kit that was born just last year at the Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium. Look up videos, very cute, amazing. So the beavers are staying with their parents until they're 2 years old. Those 1-year-old and 1.5 and 2-year-old beavers are helping mom and dad to care for the young, but they're also helping to maintain the lodge, maintain the dams, get more food. So they all hang out there together. Typically, if you've got a beaver colony, someone living on your property or in your area, there could be just 1 beaver, or it could be up to about 7 is about average for a big colony around here. I've heard as much as 10, but that's pretty rare. So, you know, you might have 2 beavers, you might have 2 beavers and a few of their young or their young of the year, which is really special. So all these beavers living together. And then those 2-year-olds, at some point, they decide, okay, I'm a teenager, I'm ready to go, I can get out of here and build my own home. And so they'll travel somewhere new and expand and build in a new area, find a mate, hopefully. But those teenage beavers sometimes are the ones wreaking havoc because they've just left mom and dad, either gotten kicked out or decided to leave on their own. And they don't really know what they're doing. Like, they've been helping out around home, but they've never built their own dam, never built their own lodge. So if we see beavers building in a really weird spot, we often imagine that, okay, this might be a 2-year-old that's just dispersing, it's just found a spot, it's testing it out, and then it might move on. So sometimes what I've seen is a really weird dam, a landowner might panic, and then a couple weeks later you realize, oh, never mind, the beaver already left. So that's definitely possible with those 2-year-old beavers. All right, I'm gonna pause for a minute to talk about questions, take any questions that we have. Sarah is monitoring the questions and answer Q&A box. So if you have any questions about beaver behavior or biology, now's a great time. Next, we're gonna queue up beaver benefits.
Perfect. Thanks, Elyssa. My neighbor did not get my memo that I was hosting a webinar, so they're mowing right now, so I hope you all can't hear it and it's not disruptive. But one of the questions we have is, there's a new beaver pond on North Creek in Bothell. It's about to cause an overflow onto currently vacant lands. Is there a way to protect those beavers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're going to move more into management towards the end of the talk, and we can talk a little bit more about it then. But what I would say is that whoever owns that vacant land is the ones that we should contact. And so they certainly could be put in contact with me, and we can talk about potential solutions. But if it's not impacting any infrastructure, and if that land is truly vacant and potentially a green space, then that's just awesome. It's like we're building a new beaver wetland in a new area. So we'll have more time at the end for questions about management as well, if you want to follow up with me on that one some more.
Thank you so much. One more question for you, Elyssa. Is it easy to tell a teenager from an adult? Is there a size difference, or what are those visual characteristics that you're looking for?
That is a great question. Yeah, it's not super easy to tell a teenager from an adult. Teenagers will be slightly smaller. You know, if you're looking at a colony of beavers all swimming around before those 2-year-olds have dispersed, you'll certainly see like potentially the really big mama and papa beaver and some slightly smaller beavers. But otherwise, it's just really hard to tell. There's so much size variability in mature adult beavers. You know, you might have a 30-pound, kind of on the small end, adult beaver, or you might have a 30-pound juvenile that's going to become one of those 60-pound honkers. So hard to tell exactly. Yeah, tough.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions, Sarah?
Not currently, Elyssa.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move into benefits, which is kind of my favorite part, because beavers do have a lot of benefits. And I think, you know, we tend to focus on the negatives of those dams being built and causing a lot of problems, but there's a lot more to it than that. Beavers are known as ecosystem engineers. So as they're building these dams, you'll notice all the different kind of structures that are here in this wetland. They're creating a lot of complexity, and they're changing the ecosystem that they're in. They're taking maybe a small flowing stream, widening that out, adding new deep water areas, different shallow areas, throwing in more sticks and logs, potentially even flooding out some vegetation and creating complexity in that way. You know, other things falling in the pond or just snags standing. So all of this complexity is really good. We as people really tend to like things in order, right? We want things to be smooth and easy, but nature really likes things complex. So beavers help create that complexity, and that's really special. So a lot of these benefits kind of translate to different things. One of the big ones is building aquatic habitat, right? If you just have a small stream that's a small channel, there's not a lot of wildlife that can live there. But as beavers make it more complex, then we see a lot more different habitats, a lot more different, areas for different wildlife to be in. For instance, these standing dead trees are really great habitat. These snags are great areas for birds like woodpeckers. Also other cavity nesting birds that will utilize those woodpecker holes. We see a lot more waterfowl in beaver pond areas, including ducks, but also things like herons who love to fish in the shallows of beaver ponds. There's also really great amphibian habitat and greater success of amphibian production in beaver ponds in Washington. A lot of mammals also benefit. We've already talked about our friend the otter, but also things like deer and elk can benefit from that shrubby vegetation and the water availability. And of course, aquatic invertebrates really love beaver ponds. There's a lot of different diversity of invertebrates and other bugs, including dragonflies. And then of course, fish really love beaver ponds. They're amazing rearing habitat for juvenile salmonids, particularly things like coho salmon, who spend a long time as juveniles in our freshwater systems. They need places to hide, they need food, they love those aquatic invertebrates to eat. They love that deep water, that slow water that beavers create. So they're really building all these different habitats, that complex habitat for all this different wildlife. A question that I get quite often is, what about fish passage, right? These beaver dams are these big structures. How do our salmon get above them? And what I'd say is that, beaver dams are typically not fish passage barriers. Historically, we had millions of beavers across the landscape. They were probably on every mile of stream in our region. And salmon were doing just fine. A phrase that I like to throw out there is that beavers taught salmon to jump. Right? We know that our salmon around here are excellent jumpers. They can jump up and over. And so beaver dams that used to span every mile of stream were probably a common barrier that allowed that the fish had to jump over. Additionally, as we get big rain events in the fall when our spawners are moving upstream, water tends to overtop the beaver dam or flow around the sides, and that's the perfect passage area for these spawning salmon. So they can move up, over, around, and jump over these beaver dams. Additionally, with those juvenile fish that love to hang out in the beaver ponds are typically, or beaver dams typically are not 100% like a concrete dam. They're not impermeable. They have all these little interstitial spaces, all these sticks meshed together, sometimes packed with some mud, but all these little areas where water can flow through and a little juvenile fish can just squiggle on through as well. Same with those overtopping flows, a juvenile fish can flush out of a beaver pond. So fish passage can be a concern on occasion, especially in modified channels. If you think an agricultural ditch, right? And a beaver builds a dam that's 4 feet tall. How are fish supposed to jump those 4 feet, especially when there's no water really going around? That can be tough. But is that really the beaver's fault, or is it our fault for making that stream really different, right? So, there are situations where fish passage can be a concern, but in general, in a really nice system, a natural looking system where beavers are having a lot of benefits, that fish passage is not a big concern. Okay, beavers, besides building habitat, are also improving water quantity. So as they're building these dams, they're holding onto a lot of water and storing that water. Some of that water can be pushed down into the ground. This is a really great graphic that was made by King County. They have an amazing beaver working group that does a lot of really good work. So as these beaver ponds are holding onto that water, some of it is being pushed down into the ground where it's recharging groundwater. Some of these dams also are really storing that water and allowing it to kind of trickle out throughout the summer, right? Like I said, they're not perfect. They're not like the human-built concrete dams. So they allow water to kind of move throughout the year, which is really helpful as we're seeing kind of lower stream flows in the summer and higher temperatures. And then in addition to that, they can also attenuate floods. So that as they're storing that water and holding onto it, they can hold onto more capacity of water as we get these big flood events. And hopefully protect some downstream areas from getting those big flushing flows during a flooding event. So water quantity is a big deal. And then of course they're improving water quality as well. As they're slowing that water down by holding onto it with their dams, a lot of sediment settles out of the water column. So beaver ponds can be kind of mucky places, but then what you see downstream is really beautiful gravel habitat for salmon to spawn. So salmon are really benefiting from this in two ways, right? They're creating spawning habitat downstream and juvenile rearing habitat upstream. Additionally, the wetlands associated with beaver ponds are really awesome. Wetlands do a great job of cleaning up water. They can help reduce nitrogen levels and phosphorus levels, and they just do a fabulous job of cleaning up waterways. So improving water quality and quantity. So in general, all of these things, building aquatic habitat, improving water quantity, improving water quality, all lead and work in tandem to be something more than they would be individually. And what they build is ecosystem resilience. So all of these things are working together to make our ecosystems more resilient. And this is especially important as we're facing some effects from climate change. So this graph is pretty simplified, as you may tell, but it shows stream flows throughout the season. So this is kind of a 2-year period. We're seeing winter, summer, etc. And so in the winter, what we see in our streams in this area is that we get high flows in winter, right? We get a lot of precipitation in the winter, and then those kind of decrease throughout the summer. And this is generally our historic trend. This is what we've been seeing for a long time. With climate change, what we're seeing is we're receiving more precipitation, but it's falling more in the winter. So what we see is our peaks and our valleys really expand. We're seeing more precipitation, but it's all falling in the winter. So we're getting these really big flood events in the winter that flush downstream, cause some erosion problems. And then what happens is we get less water throughout the summer season. So more drought, which can lead to fires and things like that. So these are kind of the negative effects of climate change that I won't spend too much time harping on because it's a little bit sad. But the benefit here is that we can add beavers to these systems. And as those beavers build dams, they can help to reverse this trend a little bit. As they are holding on, as I mentioned, storing water in the winter when we get those big storm events, they can hold on to some of that water so that it doesn't all flush down at once. We get kind of these big beaver ponds that then slowly release throughout the summer to bring that summer valley a little bit higher, right? We're adding more input throughout the summer as the beaver dams leak water from their wetlands. So beavers are building resilience with their dams, which is really, really important. All right, I'm going to pause again for some more questions. Sara's been monitoring our Q&A, but up next will be beaver management.
Hey, Elyssa. So we have 2 questions coming in so far. I'll start with the first. What is the approximate beaver population in the Snohomish Conservation District area?
You know, that's an amazing question that I don't have an amazing answer for. What I do know is that historically it's estimated that across North America, there are about 100 to 400 million beavers. That's a pretty wide estimate range because we don't really know, right? There's a lot of potential for beavers all over. But then what we do know is that they were reduced drastically. In the late 1800s to the early 1900s, we were around about 9 to 10 million beavers across all of North America. What we've been seeing lately is that there are a lot more beavers in our area. So beavers they're building resilience, but they're also resilient creatures. So they tend to occupy a lot of different habitats, And right now, what we do know is that beavers are not endangered. They're not really threatened of being endangered or being put on an endangered species list. But there certainly are many less beavers than there were historically. We don't have 400 million beavers across North America, but we do know that we have quite a few beavers in Snohomish County.
Great. Next question is, are there different varieties of beavers?
Great question. There is two varieties of beavers across the whole world. There's the North American beaver, which lives all throughout North America, that range map that I showed you. And then there's also the European beaver. And European beavers live kind of all throughout Europe and into Asia. And the European beavers look almost identical to our beavers. I've been told it's nearly impossible to tell them apart, even if you're a beaver expert. And they have seen a lot of the similar issues that our beavers have seen. So their populations decline even more than our North American beavers earlier, right? The fur trade in North America was led by the lack of beavers back in Europe, and a lot of our beaver fur was shipped back there. So they're kind of on the road to recovery as well, but starting from a much lower baseline. So there's a lot of really good work being done in Europe, relocating beavers, moving them around, trying to bring up those populations.
Great, thank you. We have another question.
Great.
Where might I find beavers in the mountains in Snohomish County? And I would also just encourage those who are watching, if you know of any, type them in the chat and I'll just shout them out.
Yeah, if you know of anywhere to see beavers in Snohomish County or in the mountains of Snohomish County, even more specifically, I'd love to hear it. I live in Seattle, so I mostly check out the beavers in the Seattle area. There's a lot of urban beavers. So my favorite spots to go look at beavers are down at Magnuson Park in Seattle and the Union Bay Natural Area by the University of Washington campus. And they're two really accessible areas to view beavers really easily. I've been to Magnuson Park probably a dozen times right about at dusk and seen beavers every time. So really special.
So I guess a follow-up question to that was, if you were trying to look for beavers up in the mountains, would you be looking for running water? Could you find like a beaver pond or a lake that they're living in that doesn't have flowing water to dam up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So beavers will occupy, like I said, anywhere with water and woody vegetation, but that could be a lake. So for instance, the beavers that I have viewed at Union Bay Natural Area are living in a bay of Lake Washington, and they have these big lodges just in the bay. So they're not really building dams on a stream. So lakes certainly are a great spot to take a look for beavers, or streams. So beavers really like to live in areas where they have a lot of room. They don't really like those steep mountain streams that are steep and like narrow channels, right? They can't really do much there. But kind of a lower gradient stream, something that's a little bit flatter, maybe a little bit slower flow, those are kind of the areas where beavers would be.
Thank you for that. And yeah, one more question just to clarify. There are beavers on the lake where I live, but I haven't seen them. So is dusk the best time to really be seeing? And maybe like, what are some of the sounds you can kind of hear for to know that the beavers are active?
Yeah, great question. So beavers are generally nocturnal. So I recommend going at dusk or at dawn if you're an early riser. And looking for beavers then. Right now we have a pretty short night, right? We're kind of at our longest days. So beavers are probably coming out a little bit earlier than dusk. You know, I went down a couple weeks ago and it was about 7 o'clock that I saw beavers starting to swim around, even though sunset isn't until 8:30, right? So, you know, dusk, dawn, really great times. As far as sounds go, beavers aren't very vocal. They don't make any, you know, vocalizations very often. They'll kind of do little murmurs to each other, but not something that you would hear across a lake. But they do a tail slap. So what they'll do is they'll take that big flat tail and raise it up out of the water and slap it down on the water. And that tail slap, it'll sound just like a big splash somewhere out in the lake or the pond where they're at. That tail slap is typically to warn off predators. So if they see something threatening like you or a big predator. They might slap the water to try and scare you or the big predator away. But they also do it to warn their family, right? They're living in these big colonies. So if Sister Beaver sees something scary, she's gonna slap her tail to tell everybody else around, hey, don't come over here, there's something weird, or get back to the lodge. So those tail slaps are really interesting and something that you're likely to hear if you get anywhere near a beaver swimming in the water.
Thank you so much for your time tonight, Elyssa. And I just want to open up to anyone else who has questions, even just—
You have a little bit more, Sarah, about—
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I just want to cover our management as well, and then we'll move on to final questions. So there are some beaver issues that can arise from these dams that they're building, right? Flooding in particular. And there's a lot of different issues that we might see. So some folks are really concerned about their precious trees being chewed because beavers tend to cause a lot of problems with that. We also have a lot of culverts in our area that tend to get blocked. And then of course, just general flooding from those dams that they're building. But the great thing is that there are solutions for all of these issues, and Snohomish Conservation District can help. So one of the solutions to beaver issues is to trap and or relocate beavers. There's a really great program in our area run by the Tulalip tribes where they're relocating beavers from the lowlands into the mountains. And it's primarily a restoration strategy. They're trying to utilize these beaver dams and the dams that they create to build better habitat and utilize all of those services that we've already talked about. Unfortunately, if you have really good beaver habitat, beavers will find it, right? So those 2-year-olds are constantly dispersing and they're finding new areas. So if you've got that really great habitat, beavers are going to be back. So what we like to recommend and what we do at Snohomish Conservation District is in-place management, things that you can utilize to keep beavers where they are. For instance, if the issue is tree chewing, where the trees are falling because of beavers, we recommend to fence off your trees. You can wrap your trees with some pretty sturdy garden fencing. That'll keep beavers away from chewing them. It can be tough if you have lots and lots of trees, so I recommend protecting the big ones or the ones that are really important to you. Sometimes we'll protect trees on restoration sites. Other times we're protecting mature trees that folks have on their property. The one thing that I do recommend with this is that it needs to be tall because beavers are big. They can be really tall when they're standing on their hind legs and trying to chew on a tree. So 1 foot tall fencing isn't going to cut it. I recommend at least 3 feet tall for the fencing. Another issue that we see a lot of is culvert blockages. We have a lot of streams going through a lot of culverts in our area. And beavers see these culverts as a really great spot to build. They see it really as just a hole in a big dam. So it's easy for them to plug it up and have a big impact. But luckily, there's a solution for that as well. We can install exclusion fencing on culverts. And so these fences are designed to keep beavers away from the culverts, keep them away from the sound and feel of water. And so these fences are really, really simple, but just keep the beavers away from that culvert. And sometimes what will happen is you'll see a lot of flow going in kind of on the edges, and beavers will build up just along the edges of the fence, but water will still be able to flow through the front end or on the other sides here. So they function kind of as they're often called beaver deceivers to deceive the beavers to not build there. And finally, of course, general flooding seems to be one of the biggest concerns that we see often because beavers are trying to flood an area and build really big habitat for themselves. But we can install pond levelers, which are a pretty simple device to manage flows of or heights of the pond. So, you know, if your home or parking lot or agricultural field is being flooded, we can set the level of that pond. And this is a little bit of a give and take. We want to manage for the human infrastructure and make sure that's not impacted, but we also want to keep the beavers in place. We want to keep those beavers where they're at, doing all the good things that they're doing. So this is a little bit, like I said, of a give and take. We want to have those ponds available, but this can be a really great solution to manage some of that flooding. And this is one of the ways that we keep beavers on the landscape and keep those benefits rolling. So these devices, like I said, really simple. A pipe through the dam. This is kind of our little engineering drawing. The pipe through the dam sets the level of that pond, and then the cage on the inlet keeps the beaver from keying into that pipe and blocking it up. So you can see here, there's that cage on the upstream end of the dam. Water flows through the pipe, and we're able to manage that water level. Okay, so lots of options for conflict resolution here. You know, we can address a lot of different beaver issues with a lot of different really creative solutions. And this is really where Snohomish Conservation District comes into play. A big part of my job is going out and helping folks deal with their beaver conflicts and learn to live with those beavers. So what we can do at the Conservation District is we can provide site visits to help analyze what's going on with the beavers, what are the issues that are happening here, and can they be resolved? If they can be resolved through one of these devices, like an exclusion fence or a pond leveler, we can assist with permitting, we can assist with cost share for materials and installation, including labor to install, given an appropriate situation. And a lot of this, a big piece of this talk and this work that we're doing is really focused. So we can do this throughout our service area, but really what we want to do is focus in the areas that need it most. We're looking for areas where we really want to keep that water on the landscape, and we want to store that water. We want to utilize those benefits. So for us, we currently have a grant, a fund funded by the Washington Department of Ecology to focus in these priority watersheds. So this covers Lake Stevens, Snohomish, Monroe. You may have noticed when you signed up for the talk, we asked for the zip code because we wanted to make sure that we're targeting these areas as well. We really want to keep beavers on the landscape across our conservation district service area, but these are the areas where we really want to focus and bring our energy to keep those beavers where they're at. So if you live in one of these areas, or you know someone who does, who's dealing with some beaver issues, then you could certainly send them my way, and we can help with all of those services that I already showed. Just to point you to a few more resources here as we wrap up. We do have a fact sheet that if you're interested in learning a little bit more about beavers, I'm happy to send that out to you. There's also a great page through the Department of Fish and Wildlife that is called Living with Wildlife, and they have an even longer fact sheet about beavers if ours isn't long enough for you and you want to learn a little bit more. And finally, the longest resource I have on here is the Beaver Restoration Guidebook, which was published by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And this really outlines more in depth all of those benefits that we've been talking about, some of the management strategies, and ways to utilize beavers in our ecosystem. So it's a really beautiful document that was well written, published in 2015. Great, so I'm going to open it up for questions again, if any have popped up in the chat box. I've left my contact information on here as well. My email is ekerr@snohomishcd.org. And that's the best way to reach me right now. I do have my office line on here, but as we're all working from home, I'm checking it a little bit infrequently, but we'll return your call as soon as possible. Definitely send me an email with further questions, but I'll take any now that are pressing.
Elyssa, we got some great questions coming in.
Great.
I'll start with beavers being chewers, but also helpful to water quality and quantity. Are they purposely introduced into restoration sites? Is there a good point at which to introduce them to a restoration site?
Yeah, that's a great question. So currently, beavers are not introduced to restoration sites in the lowlands. What we see is that there's just too much potential for conflict, you know, and movement of beavers. We can put them somewhere where we want them, but they may just move up or downstream, right? They're fickle and they choose where they want to go. But certainly a lot of restoration sites attract beavers because we're planting willows, we're planting cottonwoods, we're planting all these species that they love, and they just say, wow, thanks for the snack, and move right in. The folks that do relocations, like the Tulalip tribes doing their relocations currently, they are moving beavers into priority sites up in the upper watersheds, up in the mountains, to try and provide more water storage. So they're kind of passively using beavers for restoration. They're not moving them to sites that have been restored. They're saying, hey, we're gonna put the beavers to work and just let them do this up here. So certainly I think there's a big movement towards utilizing beavers for restoration, but there's a lot of uncertainty as well because they're wild animals and they'll do what they will.
This is another great question. Any advice for someone whose neighbor is trapping and killing beavers?
Wow, that's a great question. You know, unfortunately, trapping and killing beavers is legal, and it is an option for landowners if they're, you know, dealing with beaver issues that they can't resolve in other ways. What I would recommend is leaving a fact sheet on the door, you know, let them know what we're up to. Certainly send them my way if they're ever interested in hearing more about those benefits of beavers. I think, you know, a lot of folks see beavers move into their area and all they see is potential flooding. And, you know, that is the big scary thing, but these benefits of beavers are huge. And so we want to keep them on the landscape as much as possible. Yeah, so send them my way. I'm happy to talk to them.
That's perfect. And we just got another comment, but not a question, but the beavers had taken down a bunch of aspen trees this year in my wetland restoration. I've seen their carpentry skills.
Oh yeah, they are voracious and they will chew down lots of stuff. I'm happy to hear that they're doing well and that you're not worried about it.
Yeah, any advice to possibly some shrub or tree species that beavers like less?
Yeah, you know, there are certainly things that they like more and less, but every beaver is different, and you know, some of us don't like cilantro and some of us do, and beavers might be the same way, right? So what I can say is there are some species that we see chewed less often, but that doesn't mean it's foolproof. Those species that I'm thinking of specifically are Sitka spruce is a really good one that beavers chew a little bit less often. Twinberry and ninebark and spirea are also all chewed a little bit less often. So those are kind of the ones that I would stick to if you're really trying to avoid a lot of beaver chew. But once again, if that's all that's available, or if you've got a beaver who has a weird food preference, that may or may not work.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, anyone else who wants to ask a question or any comments for Elyssa? We also are would love for you to participate in a survey afterwards. So if you don't mind doing that survey, we can email that to you all if it doesn't pop up for you. But we would really just appreciate your feedback about how you enjoyed the talk and some of the things you learned from it, and whether or not you'd be open to working with us in the future. Perfect. Any last words, Elyssa? Any last questions, comments from anyone?
No, thank you all so much for joining. I really appreciate it. And I hope you learned some good things about beavers and are ready to go out and share it with the world and, you know, be a beaver believer all around.
That's fantastic. Yeah, we just got a great comment. Thanks, SCDE, for the work with beavers and telling us about it. So always really happy to share information. Yeah, and just thanks for your expertise tonight, Elyssa. Really appreciate it. I always just learn something new about beavers anytime you talk about them. So I just really appreciate your enthusiasm and all of your expertise.
Thank you, Sarah. I love talking about beavers. So anytime, feel free to email me or call me if you just want to talk about beavers any day. That's my job.
Oh my gosh, thank you all, and we hope you all have a good night.
Thanks.